Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning into Now This live fact check of President Trump's events. My name is Alan Piper. I'm the senior politics producer. I'm supported by our entire newsroom of producers who are all working from their respective homes. Most of us are in New York City, the global epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. We are expecting the president at any moment. Before he comes out, I want to start by thanking and congratulating my team, not just for their tireless work in our everyday news coverage and in bringing these fact checks to you, but also for Now This Webby nomination for our presidential candidate series, 20 Questions for 2020. We sat down with nearly every presidential candidate who ran this year. It was a large undertaking by a lot of people in the Now This family, and I want to express my gratitude and congratulations to all of them. Again, if you are just joining us, I'm Now This senior politics producer, Alan Piper. If you care to follow me on Twitter, I am apiper13, and I promise that I tweet a lot less than the President of the United States. While we are waiting for aforementioned president, we'd like to take your questions, so please go ahead and type them in the comments, and we will answer as many of them as we can before he comes out. Now, Susan asks, are COVID deaths climbing or has the curve flattened? And the answer is a little of both. Some states have reached their peaks, but not all. About half of the states are expected to have reached their peaks. While cases are rising at a slower rate than they were a month ago, death rates are still high throughout much of the country. And according to Johns Hopkins, there have been about 65,000 deaths as of today, which is an increase of about 1,200 from yesterday. Again, if you were just joining us, we are all working from our homes. We do not have the facilities of our usual studio. I'm coming to you from my apartment in the East Village. I don't know why I look so orange on camera today. I assure you that after 6 weeks of socially isolating in my apartment, I am even paler than normal, which is pretty darn pale. We are expecting the President of the United States at any moment. Unfortunately, we do not expect to hear from Dr. Tony Fauci. There has been a real shift in the president's events lately away from the medical aspect and more toward a celebratory aspect and economic aspect. And we have not, in fact, heard from Dr. Tony Fauci since April 22nd. Also, this is not happening in the White House briefing room. Today's event is happening in the Blue Room. I see that the chairs are spaced out at in an effort to create social distance. It is remarkable that the White House has generally not demonstrated the behavior that it is urging people to show. The White House is frequently putting people closer together than 6 feet. The president himself has said that he will not wear a mask. So it is quite a stark difference from most governors' press conferences, where often the press is not physically allowed in the room with them. It's a virtual press conference, or if they are, there is a much greater social distancing. Today's event is being billed as a presidential Today's event is being billed as a presidential recognition ceremony to honor hard work, heroism, and hope. I'm not sure whom he's going to honor. I do know that this week he has been honoring and celebrating himself. He has claimed this past weekend that he may be, quote, the hardest working president in history. And yesterday or the day before, I don't know, time's a flat circle. Earlier this week, he described his response to the coronavirus pandemic as, quote, spectacular. Again, for context, more than 65,000 Americans have died from the virus, and analysis of data from the IHME suggests that 90% of U.S. deaths could have been prevented if the president had issued physical distancing guidelines even 2 weeks earlier than he did. And Just as a reminder, the CDC's first warnings came 9 weeks before the president declared a state of emergency. My web camera is making me more and more yellow. I swear I am not suffering from jaundice. I am not developing a skin condition. This is just the state of broadcasting from my own computer in my own home. I know that most of you are working remotely, or you may be out of work. We know that 30 million Americans have filed for new unemployment claims in the last 6 weeks alone. I know that many of you may be eager to get out, and I urge you, especially if the weather is nice this weekend, to put safety first and to follow the guidelines of medical health experts like Dr. Tony Fauci. Don't go putting yourself at risk. Again, if you are just joining us, I'm now this senior politics producer, Alan Piper. We'd like to use this time to answer your questions, so please post them in the comments. Teresa asks, yes, there is another feed going on right now. So here's the deal. Teresa asks, there's another Now This feed out of the Oval Office, and that is true. That is something called a tape-churned event. That means the White House pool is unable to feed something live, so they feed the tape back later. So President Trump earlier today, just a little bit earlier, had a meeting with Daniel O'Day, the CEO of Gilead, a pharmaceutical company that is working on the experimental antiviral drug remdesivir. Dr. Tony Fauci has said that there may be some good benefits to remdesivir, that this is a promising study, unlike hydroxychloroquine or injecting yourself with Lysol, which would likely be fatal. There is some evidence that this could actually help. So we are streaming that currently from tape, while we are streaming live the Blue Room of the White House that the president is expected to enter at any moment. He was scheduled for 4:15. That is earlier than now. Also earlier this afternoon, we were briefed by President Trump's fourth White House press secretary in under 4 years, Kayleigh McEnany. This was her first official briefing, and it was the first daily, we changed the color, the first so-called daily briefing with a White House press secretary in 147 days. With the U.S. death toll just over 65,000, she urged people to tune into President Trump's Fox News town hall this weekend, promising, quote, "It will be a can't-miss television like the highly rated President Trump coronavirus task force briefings." We will not be carrying that live, since that is a Fox News production. You will have to tune into it without our fact-checking if you wish to view it. Now, Press Secretary McEnany also made a promise to the press, saying, quote, "I will never lie to you," and then she proceeded to make a large number of false or misleading statements. Remember, President Trump also made that promise on the campaign trail using those words, saying, "I will never lie to you." The Washington Post has tracked over 18,000 false or misleading claims in the just over 3 years that he has been in office. We will do our best to correct any false statements he makes today, although it is inevitable that some will get by us, as he tends to jam several into the same sentence. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm Alan Piper, Now This senior politics producer, and we are expecting the President of the United States at any moment. In the meantime, we will answer your questions, so please type them in the comments. I will also take this opportunity to walk through the timeline of this pandemic, because the President seems to be trying to revise history quite a bit. And I've gone through this timeline on several occasions, and my hope is that rather than getting bored with the timeline, you memorize it yourselves. A number of people have commented that it is helpful, and so I will continue sharing it. Although we have a question, Denise asks, why was he holding that press conference about HIV? The answer is it wasn't a press conference on HIV. The president was meeting with Daniel O'Day, the CEO of Gilead, a pharma company that has developed the antiretroviral therapy for HIV/AIDS. Gilead is the maker of Truvada for PrEP and also another new PrEP medicine. President Trump merely asked how the coronavirus compares to HIV. For decades, both Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci have been on the front lines of the U.S. response to the HIV/AIDS crisis, both here in the U.S. and across the globe. In fact, Ian, if you're able to hear me, I hope that you can post your bio of Dr. Tony Fauci in the comments of this video. Dr. Tony Fauci has quite a remarkable history when it comes to the fight against the HIV/AIDS crisis in the world. It is also worth noting that Truvada for PrEP, like most medicines, was developed with taxpayer support. Most medicines are developed with taxpayer support, and yet the pharmaceutical company that makes them retains the patent, and they often become very expensive. And Ian, if you are able to flag for the pub team, I would love for us to share the video of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez challenging executives from Gilead. That would be, I think, informative to our audience. So while we are waiting for the president, again, he was expected more than 10 minutes ago. I'm going to go through the timeline of the truth about the response to the coronavirus. So in 2014, President Trump has repeatedly criticized President Obama for the response to the coronavirus. Now, this current coronavirus is new. It did not exist in the Obama era. But some things that did exist in the Obama era were the H1N1 flu and the Ebola pandemic, which wreaked havoc in Africa and was largely prevented from causing deaths in the U.S. Learning from these experiences, the Obama-Biden administration put together what was called the Global Health Security Unit to be a new permanent part of the White House National Security Council. And the Global Health Security Unit would help spot potential health risks across the globe so that the U.S. could be prepared for them in advance. They also put together a 69-page pandemic response playbook because you don't want to be figuring out how to respond to a pandemic in the middle of a pandemic. The Obama administration chose to grace future administrations with a collection of guidance, 69 pages worth of what to do should a global health crisis emerge. Now, in 2017, when President Trump came into office, Obama's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, says that during the transition, she made a point of warning President Trump's team that a pandemic was one of the greatest threats that the nation could face, and she made a point of making sure that they had the 69-page pandemic response playbook. It appears that that playbook was discarded. Now, reporting from The Nation says that the Pentagon flagged early in President Trump's administration in 2017 that he would do well to increase the supply of masks, hospital beds, ventilators, and other equipment in the Federal Strategic Reserve, saying that should there be a health emergency, we would want to have more of those things on hand. Now, the U.S. continued to use some of those things in the first 3 years of Trump's presidency, and as far as we can tell, President Trump did not work to refill that stockpile at all. So I'm going to get on to 2018 in a moment, but I'm going to answer this question from Matthew. I'm also going to see if I can fix the lighting in my room just a touch. Again, I thank you for your patience. I am coming to you from my living room not my living room, a room. I'm coming to you from my apartment in the East Village, and it is sometimes hard to get this stream to run smoothly, and thanks to the support of our whole newsroom, we've generally been able to get it to you without a hitch if my cats don't pull the Ethernet cable out from the wall. So Matthew asks, why haven't I received my stimulus check yet? And Matthew says, I'm on SSDI and I don't have to file taxes. Now, the answer is that Social Security recipients and people receiving Social Security disability do not have to file taxes in order to receive a payment. If that is the case, though, you do need to make sure that the IRS has your info. You can do that online at irs.gov. Only non-filers meeting the criteria above, that is Social Security and disability recipients, should use the tool meant for non-filers. There is another tool meant for people who regularly file taxes. Now, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin had promised that everyone would have these payments by April 17th. We are now in May. Many Americans have not received their payments. If you are waiting for a physical check, the IRS warns that that could take until September. And it appears that at least a few extra days have been added to the timetable because reportedly President Trump insisted that his name be printed on the physical checks. Now, more information on that. Social Security survivor and disability non-filers should have seen economic impact payments in their bank account by April 29th, says the Treasury Department. The IRS said that if you have successfully entered your bank information any day until noon on Tuesday, your payment will be available the following Saturday. If you miss the Tuesday deadline, you may have to wait another week to get a payment, or if your payment has already been processed, you'll get a check that could take, they say, only about 14 days to arrive, and the check will have a commemorative name of the President of the United States on it. So whether that is worth the price of waiting a few extra days for you or not, I don't know, but that will be there for you. And Ian, if it's possible to put a link to the IRS site for that in the comments as well, so that Matthew and anyone else can click on it, that would be great. Again, many people who were supposed to have already received payments have not. This is something that we know. The process is ongoing, so just because you haven't gotten a payment yet does not mean that you are not going to get a payment. Again, if you're just tuning in, I am Alan Piper, now the senior politics producer. We are expecting the President of the United States at any moment. He was supposed to be here about 15 minutes ago. In the meantime, we're going to take your questions. Please type them in the comments, and the team and I will do our best to answer them. And I will continue walking through the timeline of what we have seen from this administration in terms of the coronavirus. So I told you earlier about the Global Health Security Unit in the National Security Council that President Obama and the Obama-Biden administration established. In 2018, President Trump fired this team. Now, he has since denied doing that, but as recently as February of this year, he acknowledged doing it and bragged that it was a cost-saving measure. And he suggested that if he needed a pandemic response team, he could quickly hire one in the case of a pandemic. He didn't like having them on just in case. This tactic has been compared to firing the fire department and putting help wanted ads out the moment a house catches fire. So also in 2018, President Trump allowed CDC funding to lapse for the CDC's epidemic prevention plan, which caused it to downsize in 39 countries, including China. Earlier today, Press Secretary McEnany suggested that a delay in getting information out of China contributed to this crisis. We could have gotten information out of China earlier had the CDC still been operating an epidemic prevention unit there. ABC has reported that the first intelligence warnings came in November. The administration has disputed that. Reuters has said that the National Security Council was briefed in December. This administration has disputed that. The Washington Post has reported that throughout January and February, President Trump was warned more than a dozen times in his presidential daily briefing of the danger of the coronavirus. The administration has disputed that as well. But what we know for certain, so it appears highly likely that this administration was alerted to the crisis in November or December of 2019. But whether that's the case or not, we know that by January 8th, the CDC was aware and issued its first warning. January 8th. Pay attention to how long it takes the President of the United States to take action. So January 8th, the CDC issues its first warning. January 9th, the World Health Organization issues its first warning. That night, President Trump holds a rally. January 10th, the World Health Organization issues a comprehensive package of technical guidance with advice to all countries on how to detect and manage potential cases. On January 14th, President Trump holds a rally. On January 18th, the Washington Post reports that Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar tried to have an urgent call with the president about the crisis. President Trump reportedly cut him off to berate him about his handling of an attempt to ban flavored vaping products. President Trump then hung up the phone and went golfing. January 19th, he golfed again. January 20th is a very important date in the world history of this disease. It is the day that the first U.S. case of coronavirus was confirmed. We would later find out that it was here earlier, but that was the day that we first confirmed it. And it was also the day that South Korea confirmed its first case. Now, this is another thing. Pay attention to how South Korea responds and what the results are compared to how the U.S. responds and what the results are. South Korea immediately implemented widespread testing and was doing nationwide testing within the first 2 weeks. We are in May, and only in May are we beginning to ramp up very serious testing within the United States. January 22nd, President Trump was asked whether he was worried about this crisis, and he said, no, not at all. Quote, we have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China. It's going to be just fine. I'll continue this timeline, but I've got a question from Kimberly. Kimberly says, I got the $1,200, but received nothing for my 3 children. Does anyone know why some are not getting the funds intended for their children? The answer is, if you claim your children as dependents on your tax return, you are entitled to receive the extra $500 per child under 17 in your household. So that is the information. You should have received that. Kimberly, I think we'd need to know a little bit more about your individual circumstance to answer the question. If you are not required to file a federal tax return, again, you will need to use the non-filer tool, which is at irs.gov, and you should be able to use that to claim the $500 payment per child. You will need a valid Social Security number or adoption taxpayer identification number for each dependent you want to claim for the stimulus payment. If someone else is claiming that child as a dependent, for instance, if parents are filing separately, if you are either not married or married and filing separately, if the other parent is claiming them as dependents, you would not be eligible to claim them also. I hope that helps answer your question, Kimberly. I hope you will soon get the funds that you need for your household. You are not alone in needing them, and PBS NPR Marist poll showed that 50% of all households in America have seen a reduction in income, either a total reduction through being laid off or a partial reduction through cutting of hours or cutting of wages. 50% of all households in the U.S. 30 million Americans have filed new unemployment claims within the past 6 weeks. And so you are definitely not alone if you are in need of funds. And I honestly wish you the best. My heart goes out to anyone who is struggling to pay bills or put food on the table during this time. We have another question. Aniqua asks, did President Trump ever address that one Republican ordering personal protective equipment from South Korea? Yes, he did. Actually, it was testing. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, a Republican, acquired 500,000 COVID-19 tests from a South Korean company. After weeks of secret negotiation, he obtained these on April 20th. Hogan said he was following Trump's guidance to governors. On March 16th, President Trump had told governors, quote, respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, try getting it yourselves. As a result, governors found that they were competing with each other and sometimes even competing with the federal government to get the equipment that they needed. Governor Hogan, who is a Republican, gave up on the federal government and decided to take matters into his own hands. He and his wife is a Korean immigrant who speaks fluent Korean. She personally negotiated with laboratories in Korea to get these tests. President Trump attacked Hogan for acquiring the supplies from South Korea, saying that he gave states a list of labs where they could get more tests. Trump also said Governor Hogan could have called Mike Pence and saved a lot of money. I don't think he needed to go to South Korea. I think he needed to get a little knowledge. That would have been helpful. But governors from both parties have disputed President Trump's and Pence, saying that there was sufficient testing capacity in the U.S. Furthermore, when President Trump talks about the availability of testing, he frequently talks about testing machines or the laboratories where the testing can occur, but there are many steps along the way to that. One of the seemingly simple items is that the medical swabs necessary to perform the test are in short supply, and many governors have found that they simply cannot get enough to perform the number of tests that they need. So, again, if you're just joining us, the President of the United States is supposed to be here. He was supposed to be here about half an hour ago. I'm going to check his Twitter feed to see if I can figure out where he is. Often the Twitter feed is the best way to figure out what the President is up to, and it does not provide any insights. So again, thank you for your patience. We are expecting the President of the United States at any moment. Until he comes, we are going to continue to take your questions. Please type them in the comments, and I'm going to continue walking through the timeline. So we had gotten into January. January 20th, first case of the coronavirus confirmed within the United States. January 23rd, China shuts down the entire city of Wuhan. President Trump in recent days has been claiming that China did not act swiftly enough to contain the virus. On January 23rd, it took a very striking action of shutting down an entire city. That day, the World Health Organization held an international news conference on the crisis. President Trump has often said that he was acting more quickly than Democrats. That is also not true. On that same day, January 23rd, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called for a public health emergency. The president did not declare one at that time. On January 27th, Joe Biden wrote an op-ed warning that President Trump was already failing in his response, that he was not taking it seriously enough, that he was not making enough advanced preparations for the possibility of the virus breaking out here. On January 28th, Elizabeth Warren released her own coronavirus plan. That night, President Trump held a rally. January 29th, sources closer to President Trump started sounding stronger alarms. Peter Navarro, President Trump's trade advisor, sent an urgent memo within the White House staff saying the lack of immune protection or an existing cure or vaccine would leave Americans defenseless in the case of a full-blown coronavirus outbreak on U.S. soil. The memo went on to say, quote, this lack of protection elevates the risk of the coronavirus evolving into a full-blown pandemic, imperiling the lives of millions of Americans. Only that day does President Trump finally form a task force. But the task force still doesn't do much just yet. which I will get to in a moment. But first I'm going to take Crystal's question. Oh, all right, Crystal. Unfortunately, I don't think we can resolve your problem ourselves. Crystal asks, they froze my account because of the deposit for stimulus, but wouldn't explain why. It's happened to several people. The best answer we can give is that you may want to contact your bank for more answers, especially if you have any privately held debt, as debt collectors may be entitled to it. The CARES Act, under which the $1,200 payments are issued, protects borrowers with outstanding federal student loans or unpaid taxes from having their stimulus checks garnished. It does not, however, protect borrowers who have outstanding debt with private lenders, meaning that some debt collectors may be able to take some money from your relief to satisfy certain types of debt. Crystal, again, my heart is with you. I hope that you can get this resolved. I know that many Americans throughout this country are counting on these payments to be able to pay their bills. Today is the first of the month. It is rent day for many Americans. There is a growing movement to call for a suspension of rent. Many cities and states across the country, including New York, have put a moratorium on evictions. In New York, you cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent at the moment, but you are still on the hook to pay the rent once things return to normal. So I would advise against falling behind if you can avoid it. Now, I just see the President of the United States has just tweeted something. Again, he was supposed to be in this room now. He's tweeting about his poll numbers right now. Yesterday, President Trump said something quite striking in his briefing, and I'm going to read it to you. Yesterday, President Trump said, "I don't think anybody can feel any worse than I do about all of the death and destruction that's so needless. Nobody is thinking about it more. Nobody has spent more time late in the evening thinking about what's happening to this country." I went through Trump's tweets last night looking for any evidence that what he was thinking about was the over 60,000 families who had lost loved ones to this crisis in this country. And instead, I saw tweets attacking Democrats, attacking the FBI, bragging about his poll numbers. So while it seems true that the president does stay up late and get up early about things that really eat at him, there's nothing in his Twitter feed that would suggest that what is keeping him up at night is concern for the people who are suffering from this disease. The New York Times did an analysis of his press briefings. They analyzed 28 hours of these briefings. They found that he spoke for 13 hours out of 28, and that in the course of those 13 hours, he spent only 4.5 minutes expressing condolence for the families who have lost loved ones. Most of the rest of the time was devoted to attacking his perceived enemies, boasting about his ratings or the high quality of his response to the crisis. Mandy asks, where is Dr. Fauci? Why isn't he at these press conferences anymore? Dr. Fauci has not spoken at a presidential event since April 22nd. Of the roughly 50 press conferences on the crisis so far, Fauci had only missed a couple until last week, although I will note that I just highlighted that President Trump spoke for 13 hours out of 28 hours of briefing, whereas Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx together spoke at only a combined 8 hours. One Trump administration official has suggested that there is a preference that Fauci do more of his work behind closed doors, because Dr. Fauci, when he shares factual information, sometimes contradicts things that President Trump has said. including when President Trump has said that we have all the tests that we need, and Dr. Fauci says that we need to be doing about double the tests that we're currently doing for the nation to reopen safely. Or that when President Trump first laid out the suggestion that the nation would open and be back to business as usual by Easter, and Dr. Fauci said, well, we don't make the timeline, the virus makes the timeline. I am aware that my camera is grossly overexposed at the moment, and I apologize. Again, I am broadcasting to you from my own home without the aid of our studio. Although actually, after 6 weeks of self-isolating, this ghastly, pale, glowing white skin is actually much more true to reality than the oversaturated video we were getting a moment ago. Okay. Someone named McSizzle asks if 5G is responsible for this virus. The answer is definitively no. The World Health Organization has addressed this. 5G mobile networks do not spread COVID-19. Viruses cannot travel on radio waves mobile networks. COVID-19 is spreading in many countries that do not have 5G networks. The only way you're going to get this disease from your phone is by touching your phone to your face if your phone is dirty, or by touching your dirty phone with your dirty fingers and then putting your dirty fingers on your face. What I'm trying to say is wash your hands and don't buy into conspiracy theories. 5G has nothing to do with any of this. It does not. That's just not how viruses work. It's not a computer virus. It is a biological virus. All right, I have been told that President Trump is coming out right now. I don't see him yet, so perhaps my feed.
The gratitude
here we go.
we're receiving from our customers is greatly inspiring, and the thank you notes along our routes are helping us get through. We're delivering a lot of essential items at this time. The amount of medicine has greatly increased. Customers depend on us for Social Security checks and other financial information, census material, mail-in ballots, and then essential items that they're ordering online. At the Postal Service, we're continuing to follow CDC guidelines to keep our...
This is a representative from the Postal Service. President Trump has been repeatedly attacking the Postal Service of late. The Postal Service provides a vital service to the U.S.
I'm very proud to work for the Postal Service and to deliver for our country.
He mentioned how he has delivered mail-in ballots. President Trump has falsely suggested that mail-in ballots contribute to voter fraud. The evidence suggests that there is no merit to this. President Trump has said the only reason to vote by mail is to commit fraud. He has also acknowledged that he himself votes by mail, voting absentee.
The restaurant had been hit hard. Libby and Raphael decided they wanted to do something to help. They began raising money to buy food from restaurants to donate to local hospitals. Within a few weeks, they have raised over $6,000, made 18 deliveries, and fed over 500 healthcare workers. And Libby and Raphael, please, I'd like to thank you and acknowledge you by having you step forward and say a few words. Please, please, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kind of covered it all for us already. So we are real estate agents in the DC area, and this mission really came about after receiving a phone call from some of our clients who work in the food and beverage industry here. They gave us some insight on what COVID-19, how the impact that it had on their business, and from there we just felt compelled to act. So we started a GoFundMe.
I would just like to point out that no one here is wearing masks.
Directly from their restaurant, and we dropped it off with different staff working at various hospitals around the area, tirelessly, obviously. The campaign started picking up, so we started doing more donations, and we kept dropping off. We also increased our goal, but we kept dropping off at different hospitals around the area. So another really cool factor that we did to sprinkle in with this was we started compiling videos of some of our contributors expressing their gratitude, and those videos were being sent along with the food drop-offs. Let me get you right.
Some assistance with it. So Mr. President already addressed most of this, but we named our campaign Frontline Fuel. We raised over $6,000, helped over 18 local businesses, and delivered meals to nurses and doctors in the area, over 500 nurses and doctors. We also partner with a local boutique company that produces hand sanitizer, Defy Aesthetic, to include in our drop-offs as an added bonus. Our mission is simple. We want to help local business while also encouraging and helping healthcare workers who are selflessly working around the clock to ensure the health of our people. Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity. It's an honor to be here today.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks very much. Great job. Tall guy, right? Next to. So how tall are you? 6'8". That's a good height. That's. I have a son that looks like he's going to be right around that number. Barron, right? He's going to be up there. That's really good. Thank you very much, and thank you, Libby, very much. Today we also honor T.J. Kim, a high school sophomore from McLean, Virginia. T.J. hopes to serve as a...
It is McLean, Virginia. That is my hometown. It is not McLean. It is McLean.
T.J. is already taking flight classes to get his pilot's license. When he heard that hospital...
By the way, President Trump was talking about that gentleman's height. President Trump lists his official height as 6'3". That would make him an inch taller than Barack Obama. I invite you to look for photographs of the two of them together.
Instructor too, knows how to fly, right? Pretty good. You better take your lessons from somebody that knows how to fly. But who also joins us today, and TJ has flown and delivered more than 10,000 pieces of personal protective equipment. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of flying, too. That's great. And there can be no better preparation for flying the military planes, right? I think there can be nothing better. But you're going to 4 rural hospitals in Virginia. So, TJ, come on up and say a few words, please. Great honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm beyond humbled to be here today. My name is TJ Kim, and I'm a sophomore at the Landon School in Bethesda, Maryland. A little over a month ago, I turned 16 when, due to coronavirus, my school year and my lacrosse season were effectively over. All I had left was my flight training. Ever since I was 9, it's been my dream to attend the Naval Academy and become a fighter pilot in the Navy. So I talked to my dad about ways that I could continue my flight training while serving the community at the same time. We came up with Operation SOS, meaning supplies over the skies. In my home state of Virginia, I found that there are 7 critical access hospitals serving the rural communities around them. And I realized that while every hospital is hurting for Tier 1 PPEs, it was the rural hospitals that were often forgotten about. So I wanted to do something to help and bless them. I've flown 4 Operation SOS missions so far to Luray Caverns, Winchester, the Highlands of Hot Springs, and the northern neck of Topping. I've sourced and delivered 8,000 medical gloves, 2,000 head covers, 1,500 shoe covers, 400 masks, as well as protective eyewear, isolation gowns, hand sanitizers, and disinfectant sprays. The response has been amazing. Throughout my journey, I've learned 2 lessons. First is that it takes a community to serve the community. What I mean is that I'm blessed by an incredible community that includes my family, my teachers and peers at Landon, my flight school, my neighborhood, and my church. It's been their support that has allowed me to complete each Operation SOS mission successfully. Second, I've learned that you are never too young to think about how to serve others in times of need. Mr. President, you once said that America is the place where anyone can rise. And today, there are youth everywhere in America rising up to help sew masks, deliver groceries to the elderly, and write thank you letters to our frontline workers. And when I think about them, I realize just how undeserving I am to be here. Mr. President, I'm so honored by this award, and I also don't know how to repay you. Let me make you this promise instead. As long as there's a need, and as long as I can find the PPEs and fly them to rural hospitals, I'm going to do it. I promise to continue to rise and be of service to my campus, my community, my commonwealth, and my country. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Always right there, in the back. Back middle. Back middle.
Good, how about standing up? Was he a great student? Huh? He did a good job? He did a good job, I'll bet. Thank you very much, that's great, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Fantastic story. So a man that I know because I spent a lot of time and spend in a place called Staten Island, right? That's true, Frank, you know that. Frank Siller from Staten Island, New York, really special place. I spent many an hour, many a day with my father there over the years, and it's just great. Nearly 2 decades ago, Frank founded an organization called Tunnel to Towers to support the loved ones of the fallen first responders and service members. He began this mission to honor the legacy of his younger brother, firefighter Stephen Siller. And so Stephen's looking down right now, and he says, my brother's in the White House doing a real job. He's very proud of you. I know how hard you work. Coming from New York, I guess especially, Frank, I know how hard you work, and you've done a fantastic job. We appreciate it very much. But he was one of the immortal heroes who gave his life on September 11th, 2001. As the virus began to spread in New York earlier this year, Frank leapt into action. He helped raise money to deliver more than 1 million pieces of personal protective equipment. That's a lot. For hospitals in the city, Frank and his army of volunteers have delivered food to firehouses and phone stations and police stations and all sorts of places all across New York and New Jersey. Frank also raised over $5 million to help pay the mortgages of families' homes at 25 first responders. I guess it's a total of 25. So you have a lot of people that are very thankful, Frank. I've heard a lot about it. First responders and healthcare workers who have tragically lost their lives in the fight against the virus. It's a vicious, vicious enemy. Frank, I want to thank you for continuing to support our nation's heroes. And again, your family and your brother is very proud of you, looking down. And please come up and say a few words, Frank, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for inviting me here today and to honor and let people know the work that Tunnel to Towers Foundation is doing. My siblings and I, we started the foundation in honor of my brother, a New York City firefighter, on September 11, 2001, strapped 60 pounds of gear on his back and ran through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which is almost 2 miles long, and I know you know that. It's almost 2 miles long, and he come out and ran up West Street, went into the South Tower, up those stairs, and while saving people's lives, he gave up his own. And since then, we've been honoring our military and first responders ever since. We built specially adapted smart homes for our country's most catastrophically injured service members. We deliver mortgage-free homes for Gold Star families and fallen first responder families who die in the line of duty, who leave young families behind. And Mr. President, when you said that we are at war with an invisible enemy, we couldn't have been more proud to know that we're doing our job and what we're supposed to be doing as a local foundation, as a national foundation, to make sure that we take care of the frontline healthcare workers. We follow the teachings of St. Francis of Assisi, who said, brothers and sisters, while you are here, while you have time, let us do good. And we know that is our guiding light from the foundation, is what we strive to do every single day, is to do good, and not just the memory of my brother, but all those who perished in 9/11, those who have perished ever since, that have given us this great country, and those frontline healthcare workers who are willing to die for you and me today, who are on that front line of the battlefield that you often speak about. And that's why our foundation has made a commitment. We want America to make a promise to these great Americans who are willing to die for you and me, that if they go out and they give their kids a kiss goodbye and they don't come home, that we're going to take care of them. You know, I know we will, because we are and always have been the greatest country that has ever existed. Why? Because the goodness and the generosity of America will always take care of the greatness of America. Mr. President, thank you once again for having me here today. God bless you. God bless America. And remember, we are only the land of the free because of the brave. Thank you.
Since 9/11 was brought up, I want to highlight several things. President Trump has falsely claimed that he was involved in the cleanup at Ground Zero. There is no evidence to suggest that. What we do know is that on September 11th, he bragged that the fall of the Twin Towers meant that he now had the tallest building in Lower Manhattan. That actually was not true. He still did not have the tallest building in Lower Manhattan. He spread a lie, just a gross lie, that Muslims in New Jersey, he claimed that thousands and thousands of Muslims in New Jersey were celebrating in the streets as the Twin Towers fell. That is, again, just a flat lie. He claims he saw it with his own eyes. He did not, because it did not happen. President Trump also applied to get federal aid for small businesses after 9/11.
Would have died in the United States without the mitigation. Through our aggressive response and the remarkable commitment and bravery of American people, we have saved thousands and thousands of lives. I can even make that, if you want, hundreds of thousands of lives.
Okay, so the president just claims that through his actions he has saved thousands and thousands of lives. In fact, he said hundreds of thousands of lives. 65,000 Americans have died to date. Analysis of data by the IHME suggests that 90% of those deaths could have been prevented if he had issued his social distance guidance just 2 weeks earlier. The CDC's first warning came 9 weeks earlier.
Massively expanded our healthcare capacity. We're now in the process of gradually reopening our country, and it's being done with a tremendous gusto and vigor. We see that all the time, don't we, Frank? They want to get out there and they want to get back. That's what they want. They want their country back, and they're getting it back, and we're getting it back safely, and we're getting it back quickly. It's a strategy guided by science, evidence, facts, and reason. Never-ending lockdown would inflict colossal damage on the health and lifespans of our people. Public health is closely tied to economic health. No state or country can long ignore the facts and the truth, and we're just very...
So the president keeps setting up a series of false equivalencies, just as he has claimed that because what he did was better than if he had done nothing, therefore it was a success. President Trump is suggesting that the alternative to opening now is to never reopen, to do endless lockdown, and that is not true, but the majority of Americans believe that we are not yet ready to begin resuming life as normal. The PBS-NPR Marist poll that was released this week found that 85% of people think it's a bad idea to return to school without more testing, 65% of people say that it's too soon to return to work, and 91% of people say that it is too soon for these sporting events that President Trump seems so eager to have, that it's too soon for them to take place as well.
We'll thrive, our industries will roar, our innovators will astonish, and America will triumph like never before. And that's what I feel, like never before. We built the greatest economy in the history of the world, greatest employment numbers.
It is simply not true that it was the greatest economy in the history of the world. There are so many metrics by which that is not true.
History's greatest creations. And one day we had to close it down. They said, sir, we're going to have to close it down. And we did that. And everybody suffered. But they did an incredible job. And because of that, we've saved maybe millions of lives. And I just want to thank everybody. This is a scourge all around the world. 182 countries as of a week ago, so it's probably higher. 182 countries.
It's 185 countries, according to Johns Hopkins.
And it's a very sad chapter. There was no reason for this. There was no reason for this. He should have been stopped at the source. but I'd like to congratulate.
So President Trump seems to be again trying to shift the blame to China, despite the fact that we know that he had alerts to this possibly as early as November 2019, and yet did not declare a national emergency until March 13th, and did not issue social distancing guidance until March 16th, and did not invoke any measure of the Defense Production Act until March 27th.
West.
So the president is posing with the postal worker. He has threatened to veto relief funds to help bail out the Postal Service unless the Postal Service raises rates on packages for Amazon. President Trump has an ongoing dislike of Amazon.
Raphael Mello.
Yeah, I think so. Let's do one, and then we'll do one as a single, right? Okay, let's take one of us. Thank you very much. You deserve that. Thank you. Almost, we got it. We won't let that happen.
So while this video plays, all right, he's returning to the podium.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you very much. Go have a good day. Bye. Thank you.
Okay, that appears to be all of today's event. The guidance from medical officials does again appear to be not a regular part of these briefings. So I also want to highlight that no one at that event was wearing a mask, even though that is the guidance from the CDC. So also, since the comparison was drawn to 9/11, I want to highlight just a few things. When New York was attacked on September 11th, the federal response began immediately. There was the federal government immediately allocated $2.5 billion. Now, there has been difficulty getting funds for the first responders in the aftermath, but at least in the immediate short term, the federal government swung into action. When New York was hit with this emergency, New York declared a state of emergency on March 7th. Day after day, Governor Cuomo implored the president to invoke the Defense Production Act to get equipment that was needed in New York: masks, gowns, ventilators. And while the president belatedly undertook these efforts, in the meantime, doctors and nurses and other medical professionals had to reuse masks that were intended for single use. In some parts of New York, we have reported on the nurses who were reduced to wearing garbage bags to protect themselves because they lacked surgical gowns. At least 9,000 healthcare workers in this country have become sick because we as a nation have not been able to provide them with the personal protective equipment that they need to remain healthy. President Trump has repeatedly compared this to a war effort, and yet, while in a war effort, the national government mobilizes. Here, states have been largely left to their own to figure out how to confront this crisis. It was Governor Inslee of Washington who first drew the comparison, as far as I know, saying, can you imagine if, and I'm paraphrasing, can you imagine if FDR had told Hawaii after the Pearl Harbor attack, good luck with that. That has been the response that we have seen from this president. So I'm going to take advantage of the fact that the president has been keeping these events shorter to go through this timeline, because I'm really hoping that you all will just come to know this timeline by heart. So, as I mentioned, the CDC issued its first guidance on January 8th. Throughout January, many people attempted to warn President Trump. The Director of National Intelligence, who is responsible for his presidential daily intelligence briefings, his Secretary Azar of Health and Human Services, his trade advisor, Peter Navarro, but the president did not take action in January. We saw the first case in the U.S. on January 20th, the same day that South Korea had its first case. South Korea took a very different approach from the United States, and it began immediately creating nationwide testing and putting into place very serious efforts at avoiding the spread of the disease. At the same time that President Trump was comparing it to a flu and saying that it wouldn't hurt anyone, to date, South Korea has had only 248 deaths, while the United States has had over 65,000 deaths. Now, of course, with a larger population, you would expect the U.S. death toll to be higher. You would expect it to be roughly 6 times higher. What you would not expect would be for it to be 252 times higher, which is what it currently is. Now, that's what was happening in January. In January, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren all called on the president to take more immediate action to face the crisis. On January 30th, China locked down the entire province of Hubei, and the World Health Organization on January 30th declared it a global health emergency. President Trump held a rally that night. We now know that in January, the Department of Health and Human Services requested $136 million to combat the coronavirus, and the White House rejected this request. On February 1st, President Trump went golfing. Only on February 2nd did the partial restriction on travel from China go into effect. 38 countries. He says that he was the first to do it. No one approved of it. Everyone was against it. He was really early, and it saved thousands of lives. Well, none of these things are true. 38 countries had travel restrictions on China earlier or at the same time. Most of them had firmer restrictions. He's falsely claiming that he was the only one for it. The decision was made in accord with advisement from public health officials, but it probably had little impact because at least 430,000 people arrived in the U.S. from China since January 1st. This includes 40,000 who arrived in the 2 months after President Trump's restrictions because they weren't total restrictions. And Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo, an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins, says, quote, "We have not seen any evidence that shows the travel restrictions stopped or slowed down transmission of the virus that causes COVID-19. On February 3rd, the World Health Organization released a strategic preparedness and response plan to help other nations deal with this. On February 5th, Secretary Azar requested more money. He asked for $4 billion to fight the virus. According to the Washington Post, this request led to a shouting match in the White House. On February 6th, the World Health Organization, whom the president has mocked, whom he said were slow in their response to this, on February 6th, they began distributing 250,000 tests around the world. They offered them to the United States, and the United States said, no, we'll make our own. Around that time, the CDC produced a total of 90 tests, which turned out to be faulty. On February 20th, President Trump proposed a budget that would cut the CDC by an additional 16%. This is in the middle of a World Health Organization declared global health emergency. On that same day, February 10th, he said that, quote, this goes away in April with the heat. April is over. It didn't go away. There are 1.1 million cases in the U.S., and over 65,000 Americans have died. February 15th, he went golfing. February 19th, he held a rally. February 20th, he fired his Director of National Intelligence because he didn't like the fact that intelligence officials had briefed Congress about Russia's ongoing efforts to meddle in U.S. politics. His Director of National Intelligence, according to the Washington Post, had been trying to get his attention on this issue for all of January and February. That night he held a rally. On February 21st, he held another rally. On February 23rd, his trade advisor, Peter Navarro, sent an even more urgent memo within the White House saying that, quote, the increasing probability of a full-blown COVID-19 pandemic could infect as many as 100 million Americans with a loss of life of as many as 1.2 million souls. Only the next day does President Trump finally ask Congress for additional funding. But that same day, he tweets, quote, the coronavirus is very much under control in the USA. Stock market starting to look very good to me. On February 26th, he says, you treat this like the flu. The risk to the American people remains very low. He said, quote, the 15 cases in the U.S. within a couple days is going to be down close to zero. Well, it was already a lot more than 15. It was 60 at that point. But 60 seems unimaginably small now that there are 1.1 million cases in the U.S. February 27th, he said, like a miracle, it's going to disappear. February 28th, he held another rally, and this was the rally where he called the reporting on the coronavirus and Democrats' attention to it, quote, their new hoax. The very next day was the first reported U.S. death of the coronavirus. Washington State declared a state of emergency that day on February 29th. On March 3rd, he said, quote, things are going very well, and he said that he didn't believe it was inevitable that it would spread across the country. On March 4th, he did an interview with Fox News where he suggested that it would be fine for people to go to work even if they had it. On March 5th, California and Maryland declared states of emergency. On March 6th, Kentucky and Utah declared states of emergency. That day, President Trump went to visit the CDC. He wore a campaign hat, and he said, quote, I think we're doing a really good job in this country at keeping it down, a tremendous job at keeping it down. That was March 6th, and that day he promised, quote, anybody, right now, yesterday, and anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're here, and the tests are beautiful. It wasn't true then. It's not true now. The next day, March 7th, New York declares a state of emergency and President Trump goes golfing. March 8th, he goes golfing again. March 9th, he compared it to the flu in a tweet and suggested it would go away on its own. On March 11th, the World Health Organization increased the severity of their language, now calling it a global pandemic. Only on March 13th does Trump finally declare a national emergency. In a Rose Garden ceremony where he also said that Google was building a website to help you find out if you had coronavirus. This apparently came as news to the fine people at Google, and it still has not happened. He also said that Walmart would be giving up its parking lots and that there would be drive-through testing at Walmarts. This has not yet happened either. On March 16th, in a call with governors, he said, quote, respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, try getting it yourselves. This led to chaos as states bid against each other to try to get the last pieces of precious material without a nationwide strategy for accumulating it. We gave up all the advantages that being a global superpower would give us. Instead, letting it be simply a matter for 50 individual states to deal with on their own. On March 17th, President Trump admitted that it was a pandemic. And he said, "I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic." A reminder, just days earlier, he was still comparing it to the flu. And now, here we are. We have lost over 65,000 Americans. There are over 1.1 million cases of this disease in the country. The President of the United States is calling his response a great success. Earlier this week, he called it spectacular. Today, at today's event, he was calling it a success. An analysis of data by the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation says that 90% of the U.S. deaths could have been prevented if the President had taken action just 2 weeks earlier. And we know that he knew 2 weeks earlier that there was a crisis. We just went through the timeline. It was 9 weeks earlier that the CDC first started sounding alarms. But the President waited to take action. And he makes the case now that because what he did was better than doing nothing, that it is a success. That if he had done nothing at all, the death toll would be even higher. And while that is true, it is a startling bar for the President to set for what is considered success. So that brings us to the end of this week's briefings. We do not anticipate that the President will be doing briefings over the weekend. I thank you for joining us. I am Now This senior politics producer, Alan Piper. I had support from our full team today, including Emily Barger, Brandon Caruso, Maddie Green, and Ian McKenna. To everyone out there, I urge you to be safe. Please follow the guidance of public health officials. Don't do what you're seeing in these White House briefings where people are standing next to each other with no masks. You saw the President posing shoulder to shoulder with people to take photographs. Please practice the safe social distancing that our public health officials are urging. Take care of yourself. Check in on the people you care about. Let the people that you love know that you love them. We are going to get through this together. Thank you, and have a safe weekend.